It's my pleasure to welcome you today to this webinar on national development banks as key enablers of cities' climate finance. My name is Kristiina Yang, and I'm a project coordinator of the Cities Climate Finance Leadership Alliance based in the Climate Policy Initiative. The Cities Climate Finance Leadership Alliance, or the Alliance, is a coalition of leaders committed to mobilizing finance for city-level climate action at scale by 2030. It was launched in 2014 to bring together stakeholders interested in closing the investment gap for urban climate projects and infrastructure worldwide, and strives to be the main platform for knowledge sharing, cooperation, and advocacy in the field of subnational climate finance. Today, we have around 60 members representing both the supply and demand sides of city-level climate finance. These include public and private financial institutions, governments, international organizations, and city and subnational networks, amongst other key groups. The product that we'll be presenting today, leveraging national development banks to enhance financing for climate smart urban infrastructure, was developed within the Alliance's Enabling Frameworks Action Group, which looks at legal, regulatory, and policy frameworks that can boost climate finance for cities. Since last May, the Alliance also hosts the Leadership for Urban Climate Investment Initiative, or LUCI. LUCI was initiated by a multi-stakeholder coalition led by the German government, BMU, at the UNSG Climate Action Summit in 2019. LUCI is a framework that elevates and tracks commitments made by Alliance members' initiatives, helping them to implement bold and effective targets. It also seeks to strengthen national framework conditions, including the capacity of national development banks to support climate smart urban infrastructure, which of course is our main topic today. So our agenda today is as follows. First, we will hear opening remarks from Hermann Amecke of the German Federal Ministry of the Environment, Nature Conservation and Nuclear Safety, or BMU, who will set the context for the presentation and discussion today. Then we'll have a presentation of the key findings of the new knowledge product by Diana Smallridge of International Financial Consulting Limited. Then we'll move on to a panel discussion moderated by Deacon of the Global Covenant of Mayors. The panelists will reflect on the knowledge product's main findings, and we have a great lineup of panelists today representing the perspectives of the city, national and subnational development banks, and a financing institution. Andy will introduce our panelists at the start of this section. And lastly, we will have an opportunity for audience Q&A at the end. If you would like to submit a question for the Q&A, please type it into the chat box in Zoom at any point during the webinar. All participants, apart from the speakers, will be muted throughout the event. And lastly, this webinar is being recorded and will be made available on the Alliance website in the coming days at citiesclimatefinance.org. The knowledge product is also available on our website now, and we will share the link to that in the chat box for you. Thank you again for joining us, and I will now pass over to Hermann, Senior Policy Officer at BMU, to make an opening remark. So over to you, Hermann.
Thank you very much, Kristiina, and I'm glad to be here. So we see across the world that key countries are now increasingly committing to more and more ambitious climate goals for 2050 and 2060. And for example, in the EU, we have agreed on ambitious goals now for 2050 and also including 2030 climate targets. We are all aware that to achieve these, we need to scale transformatively our climate action and not just incrementally. And one of the key motors for such an acceleration are national development banks. The scale of the challenge is huge. Today, the investment gap for climate-friendly urban infrastructure exceeds $1 trillion a year globally, and that's more than 1% of global GDP per year. There are today 250 NDBs globally with total assets amounting to $5 trillion a year. The number is incorrect. I don't have the correct number now ahead of me, but it's 5 times more than those held by multilateral development banks. And here's how NDBs can support green cities and practices. I'm just giving you 3 aspects among others. First, NDBs are able to provide direct financing for green cities of the future. And one of the key examples is here also work that we're doing within Germany. So the German KfW holds more than 16% of the country's GDP in total assets and invests 42% of its portfolio in infrastructure. And it sets a clear priority on sustainable investments. For example, they play a key role in energy efficiency in buildings, do not only provide finance, but actually set labels and standards there. They are key for financing renewable energy and others. Second, NDBs can intermediate funding from international finance. For example, in Ecuador, the EIB wants to use a framework loan with a national development bank there with BDE to intermediate funding for smaller sized projects in the water and sanitation sector. EIB benefits from NDBs as intermediaries and their local expertise, their knowledge and their proximity. NDBs are also instrumental to green recovery, as NDBs can support the definition and the implementation of stimulus packages. One example is BNDES, the Brazilian Development Bank, who has provided significant amounts of short-term assistance. And the importance of NDBs is increasingly recognized. We saw that last year, for example, with the Finance and Commons Summit. To date, however, we are also aware that NDBs face many institutional and financial constraints, policy, legal and regulatory barriers, just to name a few. And they oftentimes lack clear mandates, for example, to finance green infrastructure or a clear focus on municipalities. And as a result, we see that only a small share of their total finance is indeed going to climate smart investments. They often have relatively small investment portfolios and limited access to international funds. We as BMU are committed to support national development banks and countries to overcome these barriers. And therefore, we have just launched a funding window for up to 20 million euros. And this funding window receives still applications until March 10th this year. The funding window is part of our support for the Leadership for Urban Climate Investment, LUCI, that Kristiina has just outlined. And it will enhance the work and the initiatives that are already part of LUCI. LUCI is a multi-partner network initiative that includes key innovative projects of banks such as World Bank and EIB, of city networks such as C40 and ICLAI, think tanks such as FNDV and many others. Regarding the key barriers and enabling factors, I'm very much looking forward to the presentation that Diana holds later and the results of their deep dive study, plus the discussion in the panel. And we think that the study that is launched today has a high practical relevance, and it's not just some theoretical input. For example, I just learned that one of the projects that we're supporting, Felicity, now considers working together with BDE in Ecuador to use this study's methodology to identify key barriers. And I want to close that short opening with thanking CCFLA, thanking the Alliance. We consider their work as an absolute instrumental guide to our advocacy and funding activities at the BMU. And their focused work on NDBs was also crucial in shaping the above-mentioned funding call. Hence, again, great thanks to Barbara and her team, and most importantly, to all members of the Alliance whom are making this happen. And only with such collaboration among actors, institutions, and disciplines, we can indeed scale as rapidly as we need. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Hermann, for your remarks and for framing this context for the webinar, particularly emphasizing the importance of NDBs in a green recovery, the relevance of this work to BMU, and for already picking out some interesting examples of NDBs. Thanks so much. I'm happy now to introduce Diana Smallridge, who led the development of the Alliance Knowledge product on leveraging national development banks to enhance financing for climate smart urban infrastructure, and who will be presenting the key findings today. Diana is the president and CEO of International Financial Consulting Limited, an expert advisory consulting firm she founded in 2000, focusing on DFIs. She is an expert in institutional development strategy, risk management, performance evaluation, and governance for national development banks, and is also the founder of a new Center of Excellence for National Development Banks. So Diana, happy to pass it over on to you.
Many thanks, Kristiina, and to you, Hermann, for those opening remarks. This is a well, I should just say to the audience, good morning to the Americas. And I think good afternoon to Europeans and Middle East and Africa. And then for those in Asia who've stayed up late to participate, thank you so much for being here. I am personally very delighted to be with you today and grateful for your interest. As Hermann mentioned, this is a seminal piece of work as it really represents a deepening body of research on national development banks whose roles and purposes are really increasingly coming into the spotlight, not least as emergency response conduits during the pandemic, but also as key intermediaries in the climate finance landscape. So let me begin by taking you through our presentation. I'm going to go directly into our methodology and how we approach this study, so you have a little bit of background. So we interviewed cities and national development banks globally to identify the key challenges and opportunities they face in financing climate smart infrastructure. So we undertook desk research and analysis of key findings, and these were used to inform the development of our, what I'll describe in detail, our maturity model framework for cities and NDPs. And this framework covers 4 dimensions for cities and national development banks, 12 parameters on which NDPs and cities can measure themselves to assess their level of maturity. And I'm delighted to hear that Ecuador is now practically implementing this. So in terms of who we included in the study, we chose a range of cities and national development banks to ensure diversity in geography, size, needs, and capacity. And while the focus was developing countries, some cities and NDBs that were interviewed were quite advanced in their capacity for financing climate urban infrastructure projects, which was helpful to define what constitutes best practice. So let me give you a bit of background about the role of national development banks. I'm sure many of you are paying deep attention now to these special institutions. National development banks can be specifically mandated to support the financing of green urban infrastructure, given their position in the ecosystem. And Hermann made a really important point about the need for a clear mandate for this area, and I'll touch on that a bit later. They sit at the nexus of public policy and the financial sector and have a responsibility, usually through their mandate, to address market failures, such as those relating to increasing green investments and shifting capital towards a lower carbon and climate resilient infrastructure. As part of the government instruments, they can leverage their relationship with government to coordinate at the policy level related to green infrastructure and align with national climate policies. And then critically, they play an important role in mobilizing private sector capital by de-risking and signaling through a catalytic mechanism. In terms of what national development banks or public development banks or the broader category, research indicates, and I'll note this comes from the Finance in Common Summit that took place in November that Hermann mentioned. Only 4% of development banks are specifically mandated to finance local government. Now, it doesn't mean they don't have general mandates to fill market gaps and follow policy opportunities, but those that have specific mandates. This suggests that national development banks can play a larger role to support local governments. And on the demand side, municipalities have also reported that less than 1% of their low carbon financing comes from national development banks. So there is a need to bring these two sides together and step up efforts. So let's look at how national development banks can play a role in enhancing the support for municipalities to develop and finance climate smart infrastructure. So if you look at the life cycle of project development, At the conceptual stage, design and scoping, there's a need for technical and financial capacity. Participation in the policy dialogue and coordination at the national level. Cost-benefit analysis, climate risk assessment, prioritization of projects. And then moving to the project preparation for developing a bankable project pipeline. And then finally, the actual financing of a project in the investment stage or the implementation stage. And so with the instruments that many national development banks have, whether it's grants or repayable, reimbursable contributions, a technical assistance arm, equity and other de-risking instruments, and of course, straight up direct financing, they have, most of them have in their toolkit those instruments needed to support this sector. And of course, based on their proximity to local government, their knowledge of the local needs and access to diverse sources of funding, NDBs can really leverage these tools to support municipalities. So let me move then to key findings from the demand side of clean urban infrastructure financing, so the cities. So we looked at barriers and enablers for cities. The barriers at the policy level, the institutional and financial level informed the development of our maturity framework. And so some of the common themes on the next slide that emerge from our research and interviews with cities on the key enablers for accessing financing, looking at the policy and legal and regulatory level, things like advocacy and relationship with national policymakers ensures political commitment and support for green urban infrastructure projects. National development banks or subnational development banks, as is the case, are these public policy transformative tools specifically mandated for this area and can enhance the municipal capacity through fiscal decentralization and financial intermediation. So cities are saying that if these are in place, these are important enabling conditions. And the ability to enjoy transfers supporting from central government to support the financing of infrastructure projects, particularly those cities that have a limited revenue base. So other key enablers include the financial and non-financial support mechanisms, such as the availability of planning tools and resources to improve the municipality's capacity to develop and design projects, access to financial intermediaries to be able to support connecting the financing needs of municipalities, de-risking tools that are offered by national development banks, but also multilateral development banks, which mobilize private sector investments. Technical assistance is critical to really enhance the capacity of the municipalities and strengthen them financially to be increasing their access to finance. And finally, a key condition is these project preparation facilities or funds that are offered by DFIs and MDBs, National Development Banks, helping municipalities to build that pipeline of bankable projects. So some of the internal common themes that were identified as an enabling condition were revenue streams. So building a strong revenue stream, which includes stronger management of city assets. And then partnerships are also a critical factor to be able to move ahead. So looking then at the city maturity model, as I noted earlier, there are 12 dimensions covering strategic, financial, policy, legal, and regulatory, and operational. And in each of these dimensions have 4 parameters. Under strategic, engagement with national policymakers is good practice to ensure that the city's infrastructure plans are designed through engagement with top national officials. And so this top-down approach is really important. Alignment of long-term climate action plans at the city level to ensure alignment with the national climate goals. On the financial side, I noted revenue capture and the ability of the city to optimize revenue capture from both the tax collection side as well as utilities and management of these assets to signal financial strength. Some expertise in financial structuring, as well as access and information on who are the climate finance players. How can a city access these funds? And finally, fiscal capacity is obviously an important aspect to a city's creditworthiness. On the policy side, the authority to collect taxes, that the city is granted that authority and has the capacity, and that the debt limit on a city budget is large enough to accommodate funding for these larger climate finance projects. And finally, under policy is the ability, the regulatory ability to borrow from the city's perspective. And then, of course, operationally, a number of key things have to be in place. The capacity to really undertake project preparation, qualified human resources, a management information system that facilitates the ability to have long-term capital plans and tracking those projects. And then a unit devoted within the city administration to climate. So I know we have on our panel, Rebecca, you'll meet her later from Cape Town. And that was a very interesting case study for us. It really demonstrated best in class from the point of view of revenue capture. And you'll all be familiar with what Cape Town went through in terms of water shortages, but how they really focused on enforcing the collection of taxes, building a revenue base, and really maximizing what can be available for the city to invest in key infrastructure opportunities. So let me then move to the findings on the supply side. So these wonderful national development banks that I've been working with my whole career, they are so special in this context to be able to build capacity for cities to be able to access and mobilize climate finance. So let's look at some of the common themes. Again, we see policy, legal, and regulatory barriers. We see institutional barriers. We see financial barriers. And looking then specifically at some of the key enablers to address these key factors around having bankable infrastructure projects and a pipeline, and we've seen some really good examples of that. We have another panelist, Bernardo, who could speak to what Banco is doing there. The ability to provide capacity building to cities and municipalities, having a dedicated fund to provide resources to this area, resource mobilization from the global DFIs and global community, of course, helped by accreditation at the level of the GCF, and we'll hear from the GCF as well on the panel. And then capacity to issue green or sustainable bonds. So these are some of the key enablers we identified. So moving then, in the short time I have left, I think we should just move straight to the maturity model. Again, 4 dimensions: strategic, financial, business, and operational. And the key thing for strategic is having a legal structure that is established by an act or specific legislation that gives very clear mandate to support green infrastructure and or local government, or at least has a mandate broad enough that encourages this. Too broad a mandate, a national development bank might prefer to do something a little easier than this sector. So having a clear mandate is important. Having a seat at the policy table, playing an important role in policy coordination among the key ministries. On the financial side, having sufficient size of equity to be able to support the size of deals, access to innovative capital, and have a devoted resource mobilization unit to be able to access blended finance, grant funds, and others from DFIs. And we saw cases of those national development banks who really set aside, even if it's just one person, who was really devoted to that outward focus. On the business side, banks that can participate upstream in that project design, banks that act as a catalyst and de-risking instruments, so have all the tools in their toolkit, and of course have sectoral expertise in climate, smart urban infrastructure financing. Operationally, it helps that the bank is the preferred intermediary in the country for international climate funds. It stands to reason that they'd be an important intermediary, but they also need to be able to set indicators to monitor and report on their transactions or green infrastructure transactions. We looked at a case study here. Again, I'll be brief on the case study. PTSMI Indonesia, an excellent example of the resource mobilization concept, where they have a devoted team focusing on bringing together an integrated project funding platform, combining private funds, public funds into a blended financing scheme to develop, finance, and implement SDG-oriented Indonesian infrastructure projects. So it's called SDG 1 Indonesia. And it helps reduce transaction costs and really brings alignment of stakeholder interests. So moving to conclusions and recommendations, I'll wrap up here. So linking the demand and supply side barriers of climate smart urban infrastructure financing to define some actionable opportunities. So NDBs that should prioritize these green urban infrastructure financing efforts are those that score high on the strategy dimension. So this is a prerequisite. Have a proper legal structure, a clearly defined mandate, and are seen and play an active role in policy coordination at the national level. Mature cities that meet most of these criteria of each of the 12 dimensions, and Cape Town or Curitiba, who we also interviewed, can access finance from international capital markets and the bond market at less cost than their national development banks. So they've sort of moved beyond the needs of a national development bank potentially. So the focus and priority of national development banks should be placed on supporting and financing cities where funding and capacity are limited, but where there's a drive to advance climate action. The National Development Bank can play a significant role in filling the technical and financing gaps that prevent cities from raising capital from other markets, and can enhance their own internal capacity to cater to the varied infrastructure project needs of the cities they finance. So with this, noting time that I've gone over a little bit, I want to hand it back over to Kristiina to introduce the moderator for the panel discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Diana, for this really great summary of the new research. As a reminder to our audience, the full knowledge product is available on our website, and it includes much more detail about the maturity models discussed, the dimensions, as well as further case studies from those interviews that Diana mentioned. And we've also developed policy briefs directed towards the 4 stakeholders discussed, so NDBs, city officials, IFIs, and national government ministries, that summarize the key points of the larger product. If you have any questions for Diana, please type them into the chat box and we'll try to pick these up during the Q&A section. She'll be on hand to answer a few of these. And now moving straight into our panel discussion, I'll pass over to Andy Deacon to moderate the next section of this webinar. Andy is the Director of Strategy and Operations at the Global Covenant of Mayors. He's also a co-chair of the Alliance's Enabling Frameworks Action Group and a member of the Alliance's Steering Committee. So over to you, Andy, to introduce and moderate the panel section. Thanks.
Thank you, Kristiina, and good afternoon, good morning, good evening, everybody. And I saw Rebecca briefly put the camera on. I'd invite all panelists to switch on their cameras if they don't mind. So a very quick bit of context. This is clearly a key product for the work of the Enabling Frameworks Action Group of the Alliance. And that group is seeking to strengthen the legal, regulatory and policy frameworks that can boost climate finance for cities, and a number of previous knowledge products, webinars, outreach events and engagement, and during the course of 2021 looking to develop the individual regionalization and regional focus of that activity, and to continue to build on this work and really build on and develop those relationships with national development banks. So just to set the scene for this discussion, so we have a round of questions prepared for our panelists, and they will each bring their individual perspectives, and then we'll open up the floor for a round of audience Q&A. So hopefully we'll allow some time at the end for you all to join in with your questions. Just briefly to introduce all of our panelists together at the beginning. So for the city perspective, we have Rebecca Cameron, who is Senior Professional Officer Net Zero Carbon Built Environment for the City of Cape Town in South Africa. Rebecca is a professional urban planner, formerly working at ICLE Africa on climate change, energy and resilience issues, and she has been involved in various city climate finance related initiatives and is working with a number of cities in Africa. For the NDB perspective, we have Bernardo Roth, Director for Financial Evaluation in the Investment Banking Division at Banobras in Mexico. So currently he is the Director for Financial Evaluation in that division, and for the Mexican National Infrastructure Fund, FONADIN, which is managed by Banobras. Bernardo is in charge of evaluating financial viability and assessing the financial risk of financial structures for public-private partnership infrastructure projects, and in particular, those that are in need of financial enhancements. And additionally, he oversees the design and implementation of 2 new units within his division, the Sustainable Infrastructure Unit and the Project Preparation Unit. Next, for the IFI perspective, we have Drazen Kucan, Lead Urban Development and Energy Efficiency Specialist for the Green Climate Fund. Drazen provides technical expertise, develops the pipeline and oversees the GCF's portfolio in the area of low carbon and resilient urban development and energy efficiency from buildings, cities, industry and appliances. And he is also a member of the CCFLA Steering Committee. For the Subnational Development Bank perspective, then we have Henrique Amarante de Costa Pinto. He is Vice President of the Banco de Desenvolvimento of Minas Gerais. So BDMG for short is a development bank controlled by the state of Minas Gerais in Brazil. The bank offers financial services to both the public and private sectors, including credit and project preparation, and he works directly with a number of excuse me, municipalities on green urban infrastructure. So with those introductions done, we'll begin the round of questions, and I'd like to come first to you, Rebecca. So the city of Cape Town could be considered relatively mature in its ability to finance climate smart infrastructure projects. In your experience, what are the key short and medium-term actions that cities should prioritize to begin working with national governments and financial institutions to get access to financing to get these projects underway?
Hi, Andy. Thanks for the question, and thanks to the CCFLA for the invitation to be here with everyone today, this afternoon. And as you mentioned, I'm speaking and have the benefit of experience not only from my position in the city of Cape Town, but also kind of cities of different sizes across the continent. And so also just reflecting on that experience too has contributed to my response to this question today. So I would say that there are thinking about maybe some of the 5 key actions that I think cities could start taking themselves. So first of all, we often think of climate finance as big tranches of finance coming from international institutions coming into a country, but actually climate finance has a really broad definition, and any money that is spent to either reduce greenhouse gas emissions or reduce the number of people vulnerable to climate hazards is actually climate finance. And so cities need to really look at what's in their the financial mechanisms they have available, whether this is their kind of property rates, their service tariffs that they receive from service delivery, the intergovernmental transfers that they receive, and to think how they can use that and apply it to climate smart urban infrastructure as a starting point. One, because it's easier than going through all the project preparation that is often required to access larger scale international climate finance, but also to practice at a smaller scale the same skills that will be needed to access larger climate finance. I would then say the second action really is that often the ability to finance projects comes down to the ability to de-risk projects. And so here, the example of the city of Cape Town really demonstrates how a city can play a leading role in providing a lower risk environment for investors and lenders by ensuring that there's a stable cash flow with which to repay kind of debts and loans that have been taken out. So this is really due to the mature revenue collection system that was mentioned earlier. So cities can create a lower risk environment for projects because, of course, project risk always operates within organizational risk. And this really requires broad institutional change management processes that are supported over a number of years by both the technical officials and leadership and political leadership. And this can also assist national governments and national development banks actually to increase the transfer of funds to cities, because then a city is more likely to be able to meet the risk and governance standards required by investors without having to have national government or Ndps step in to de-risk projects. The third area I would say is looking now internally within the city and how it organizes itself around the topic of climate change. And so over the past few years, I've really seen how different cities have thought quite deeply about where to position climate change institutionally within the municipal structure. And so what often happens is that climate change is positioned in the environmental department, but what is required to develop climate smart urban infrastructure projects and kind of a pipeline, a bankable pipeline, is actually really technical skills on the engineering side and financial modeling. And so these are not necessarily skills that traditionally are operating within the environmental department. So there needs to be strong collaboration between officials who have those skills and the officials in the environmental department, if that's where climate change is, or also to upskill those officials working on climate change to really think with an infrastructure lens so that we can develop these bankable infrastructure projects. I would say the fourth action is then on kind of the softer side of being able to attract climate finance, which is actually the ability to look outside the municipality and actually develop and then maintain long-term relationships with financiers and funders. And I think this is one element we don't always talk about, but it is really important for cities to develop relationships with funders and financiers so they can make evident and their demand for finance over time. And they can also then understand the kind of requirements from the funders and financiers of what they need to do in order to access finance. And also then so that they can potentially see future avenues and different kind of mechanisms of to finance projects coming down the line and prepare for them. Now, unfortunately, these often happen in more informal spaces, not always formal spaces. And that's why relationships are so key. And I think many of us who've worked in this climate finance space would understand the nature of that. And so why it can be that cities who are maybe new to the space would find it more difficult. So that would be a key step, I say. And, just putting your hand up and saying, we're really interested in this, and going out to your National Development Bank and really speaking to them about your needs and the demand you have for finance, because even though national development banks might be receiving climate finance, they do not necessarily have the capacity to spread themselves across the whole country to go and find projects. So it's really about this partnership.
Great, thank you so much. And a number of key dimensions there, and definitely ones also that the Global Covenant has been looking at too. Yeah. So next, we'd like to pose the next question to Bernardo Roth, Director of Financial Evaluation at Banobras. So then, of the maturity dimensions that are discussed in the report, Bernardo, which do you feel are the most feasible to address in particular in the short and medium term? And can you say a little bit more about how Banobras is working in those areas?
Yeah, well, thank you. I want to first thank the CCFLA Secretariat for inviting us to participate. And I would like to answer by telling you the first question, how Banobras is working in these areas, and then we will see kind of the steps that might have to be followed. As part of the sustainability framework of Banobras, we are guided by, we set two policies, one environmental, social, and gender integration policies. And we want to deliver this by a sustainable bank strategy. Yeah, and this strategy has been established around 6 strategic axes, which are governance, integrated processes and strategic alliances, environmental and social risk management, sustainability indicators, promotion of sustainable projects, and communication and transparency. Right, and the objective of this strategy is to consolidate a sustainable financing chain. And what we want to cover is 3 main building blocks of this chain. The first block is, of course, mobilizing funding by attracting resources through, for example, we are certifying us to emit sustainable bonds in international markets. We are also created a management system to manage social and environmental risk. That means that's the kind of the credit process. This is going to be integrated within it. And then, of course, is the placement within of these resources on bankable projects, green and social, with social impact. So that's kind of the main strategy of Banobras, and well, this is aligned or is in line with some of the dimensions of the maturity model, as we have already defined a clear mandate to migrate towards more sustainable and environmental friendly projects, so financing these projects. We are capitalizing ourselves with resources and funding from international investors that also are seeking this type of alignment, and well, this is also enabling us to access to innovative capital, and well, this as well will contribute that Banobras works as a catalyst and de-risking tool for these projects. well, the whole strategy is also addressing the issue of developing strategic alliances. No? And furthermore, we are also putting forward some other initiatives, but these are being implemented by the National Infrastructure Fund, which is kind of the pre-gate to actually to the bank loans. It's a vehicle that enables to coordinate infrastructure investment efforts, and in this sense, we have addressed certain dimensions of the maturity model as well. As I will tell you, we are developing and then trying to implement a project preparation unit, which seeks to support medium-sized cities by increasing their quality of life and competitiveness in a sustainable way. And this by providing technical assistance and financial support. No? And what we're looking at is at projects that have a potential to self-generate financing sources. We're also working, or we already have a platform that is called Proyectos Mexico, that which purpose is to demonstrate to investors which projects are being are ready for market. No? And the innovative part of this platform is that it has a sustainable fact sheet that aims to promote or to rate in a way these projects, so that investors can cherry pick those that are attaining a better rating. No? And this fact sheet was developed in coordination and with support from the IDB, and it is working with the IDB sustainability framework. And finally, we are also working in Fonadin well, we already established, we founded the Sustainable Infrastructure Unit. And well, the idea of this unit is to manage the environmental, social, and governance management system that will seek to address certain areas like advising sponsors and train them on and to actually be able to fulfill this sustainability criteria that we are setting for the projects. And so that the role of this unit is like a transversal role with the supports and grants that the Fonadin is offering to sponsors. The idea is that since the inception and very upstream, this unit is guiding and helping sponsors to fulfill and plan and design projects that are more sustainable, and at the end are constructed and financed and at the end dismantled, all with this sense of sustainability.
Thank you. Okay, so yeah, some important points there about both embedding those criteria, about making the support available, and again about building those alliances and partnerships in order to enable that delivery. Thank you for that, Bernardo. Next, to turn to Drazen on behalf of the Green Climate Fund. So interested to know then, what is the role of NDBs in the climate finance architecture for low emission climate related infrastructure, and how does GCF seek to support this area of activity?
Yes, good evening from South Korea. You know, in GCF speak and in our accreditation structure, we consider national development banks as direct access entities. And one of the Green Climate Fund's distinctive features is the provision for developing countries to access financial resources through national entities, meaning that climate finance can be channeled through the country directly. So the direct access modality is designed to help developing countries exercise ownership of climate change funding and better integrate it with the national climate action plans. So when we discuss the role of NDBs in the climate finance architecture, we first need to understand the correct setting, which sees, I think, national development banks as a main conduit for the subnational and or decentralized finance for public policy and public financial instruments with a mix of market and development objectives. In other words, NDBs are, or perhaps ideally should be, on the top of the ecosystem of subnational low emission and climate resilient infrastructure planning and financing. So while MDBs and other development finance institutions typically operate with sovereign focus model, meaning that while funds can flow to local authorities, they can only do so with the express approval of the sovereign governments. Accordingly, local governments or individual cities, in our case, may or may not be in focus on national priorities as seen by the central government. So in addition to this, the governmental fiscal position is a limiting factor. I think we have not talked about this enough, especially so in the current COVID-19 prone environment. So any sustainable approach to public budgeting needs to consider strengthening of fiscal position, but in the same time to be optimally effective using scarce budgets to leverage more private sector financing, including sources of climate financing and capital markets. As we know, roughly 1/3 of public financing is available for climate financing, but about 2/3 of global climate financing should come from private sources and leverage financing and capital markets.
Right.
So the core, yeah, go ahead.
No,
Sorry?
no, good. Carry on.
Yeah. So the core of the matter here is that NDBs are rather crucial financial intermediary that is enabling direct access to finance for local governments, municipalities, and cities, and all the other stakeholders. So by extension, it is obvious that local authorities can best access international climate financing by working closely with NDBs. To institutions like GCF, working with NDBs rather than a bundle of individual cities, which are perhaps unable to form an effective urban aggregation or channel their demand through an effective executing agency, mean that GCF working with NDBs can reach necessary efficiency as well as effectiveness of intervention and maximize climate impact for intended beneficiaries.
Great, thank you very much. No, yeah, that's an important point about aggregation and an opportunity to pool those, and very clear there that that GCF has a role in enabling that to happen between groups of municipalities and potential finance providers, and very much take the point about crowding in private sources of finance off the back of that public investment. So no, very helpful. Thank you very much. Yeah, for the sake of time, then next question is then to Henrique Amarante de Costa Pinto from BDMG. So BDMG is a subnational development bank, both being one of the state-level development banks in Brazil and also working with municipal and subnational governments. So then, Henrique, how does BDMG integrate its efforts with the work of other state-level development banks in the country, with other NDBs, including BNDES, and with other MDBs? And can you also describe how BMDG is working with municipalities within all of that context? Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Andy. And good morning, afternoon, and evening to everyone. First of all, I'd like to thank you for the invitation. It's really an honor and a privilege to share with you some highlights of BDMG's works in Brazil. Let me also congratulate Cities Climate Finance Leadership Alliance for the launch of this new important research. Now going to the question, as a subnational development bank, I think we work as a value chain. Multilateral development banks have a better access to financial markets and can raise fundings in better conditions than subnational development institutions. On the other hand, we see ourselves as the last mile institutions, because we are closer to the clients, meaning that we are in a better position to finance municipalities as well as small and medium-sized enterprises. In this way, we have raised funds with IDB, AIB, IFC, CAF, AFD, and others to finance sustainable projects in the large number of municipalities. How do we work with the municipalities? There are two main streams. First, financing sustainable infrastructure and providing support to prepare PPP projects. So we have a platform of project preparation. In the first stream, we develop a standardized model to gain scale to make it possible to finance even very small municipalities with efficiency. Just to give a number, we have today 470 municipalities with active loans. In the second stream, we do like a consultancy services to the municipality to prepare PPPs projects, a project preparation facility. This work turn, as you know, feasible many infrastructure projects and attract private capital that otherwise wouldn't be done. We focus on sectors such as public street lighting, smart city, transportation, water and sanitation, solid waste, and others. This is, in a very short words, the approach BDMG is using to accomplish our mission as a development bank. And I'm available to answer any other question you may have, and thank you very much.
Thank you. And I see we've had a few other questions posted in the chat box. And if we don't get a chance to get to those, which we may not in the next few minutes, then we will share those with all of the panelists. And you are also welcome, just posted in the chat box by the Secretariat team. In case we don't get to those questions, then you can also send them in to the Secretariat as well. So use that email address that's posted in the chat there. Thank you to each of our panelists for bringing those different perspectives, a few common themes that have come out there. And in moving to the wider audience, then also wanted to turn to Joseph Haider, Principal Climate Change and Finance Expert at the International Development Finance Club, the IDFC, just to give a short reaction initially on the new knowledge product from the IDFC perspective. So over to you, Joseph.
Thank you, Andy, for this kind introduction, and thanks for giving us the floor, the IDFC, the floor in this interesting webinar. I was really following with great interest your proposal for the maturity models, and this is very well presented. I have nothing to add to that. You really identified the bottlenecks and the limitations very clearly and made good proposals on how to address them. I just wanted to mention two aspects that seem important for the implementation of these. One thing is I'm working for the climate facility of the IDFC. The IDFC is a club of 26 national and regional development banks. And of course, we have to work on our maturity, and the climate facility is supporting our members, improving their maturity, improving their knowledge on climate finance, helping them to make more and better climate finance. And we're happy to have some support from the Green Finance, Green Climate Fund as well for doing this, and we are very glad to do that. However, working with municipalities and improving this maturity does not only require improving the maturity of the NDCs, at the same time, of course, of the cities, as you are well describing. And my point is, we have to work together as early as possible. So what Rebecca was saying in the beginning is very important. The cities should seek the financing institutions contact as early as possible. And I will add to that, we, the financing institutions, should get in contact with the cities as early as possible. Otherwise, we're really just losing time and wasting time and reinventing the wheel for nothing. That does not make sense. So please get engaged as early as possible. The second aspect is, if you want to scale up urban climate finance or climate finance in general, of course, we have to get as many stakeholders and as many financiers on board as possible. And if we want to do that, we do need some standard approaches. Everything is very complicated. For years, I was working on adaptation, and everybody tells you this is very complicated, specific, and you have to have a very important and expensive study for every single project or activity you are developing. No, we have to go, if you want to scale up, we have to go for more simple approaches. And really, the perfect is the enemy of the good. We should not be too perfectionist with that. We should try to identify a consensus on easy to use, usable methodologies and instruments for doing that. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that contribution. I see we're at time, if not 1 minute over. So I guess, first of all, I would like to thank the report author, Diana, authors, Diana and team and colleagues. This is only the beginning of this set of conversations and discussions, working through the Enabling Frameworks Action Group and more broadly across the Alliance in conjunction with other of the action groups, including those on the financial toolbox and on project preparation. Then there's really an opportunity to now build on this maturity model and the framework that's set up, and to continue to build and draw on that work as we move forward. And as others have said, it presents really a new assessment framework and a key moment and an opportunity here. And we very much welcome ongoing kind of conversations and participation around this activity and the opportunity to continue to build on it with all of the organizations that you've heard from today, and no doubt many others more broadly. Thank you very much to those of you who have submitted questions. As I say, unfortunately, we're out of time, but we will share those questions with each of the panelists. I'm not sure how one gives a virtual round of applause. I know you can pop up reactions and clap hands, but yeah, just a word of thanks also to each of our panelists and contributors to the event today, and as ever to the enormously hardworking CCFLA Secretariat team. And on that note, maybe back to you, Kristiina.
No, thank you, Andy, for that perfect summary of the event. And I just want to thank you as well for your moderation today, and to all of our speakers. We look forward to seeing where this goes in the future and moving forward with this. Thanks so much, everyone, and have a great day.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks all. Bye-bye.